Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us today for another beautiful day at the Rules Committee. We're delighted today to have two distinguished members of this body who will be here with us to talk about important aspects of not only what protects America, but perhaps what protects the entire world. Today, the Rules Committee will consider H.R. 6237, the Matthew Pollard Intelligence Act for fiscal years 2018 and 2019. H.R. 6237, which we will discuss first, supports critical national security programs, particularly those focused on countering threats from China, as well as many cyber attacks which are harming this great nation and its ability to effectively hold its own secrets. The bill provides the intelligence community with the necessary resources and authorizations to ensure that we remain capable of protecting and defending the United States of America, the greatest nation in the world. This legislation benefits all Americans by ensuring that the government can effectively protect their interests, prepare for world events that would impact the United States, and insulate our economy against potentially harmful international actions. Gentlemen, today you come before a committee that was prepared, I think, for you with a good number of viewpoints. The committee, some of us have been out to the National Security Agency over the last few months, have taken place in discussions with those among you, whether it be the NSA, the CIA, or other government agencies that help protect America. We've tried to familiarize ourselves with a number of the issues that perhaps are involved in things that may or may not be discussed today, and I'm delighted that you're here. Before we move to you, knowing that the young chairman, Mr. Nunes, has his other committee hearing going on, the Ways and Means Committee, and that markup has begun, we're going to get right to you and recognize that. Does the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts seek time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do. You know, I mean, you just mentioned that you know we need to be concerned about protecting the national security of our country, and I couldn't agree more. But lately, I think the President of the United States is doing more to undermine our national security, and it bothers me greatly. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone, where up is down, and Putin and Kim Jong-un are our friends, and Canada and France are our adversaries, where meeting with Putin is easier for this American president than meeting with our NATO allies. I mean, yesterday the president was asked by a reporter if Vladimir Putin is a friend or a foe, and President Trump responded, and I quote, "As far as I'm concerned, he's a competitor," end quote. Now, let's be clear. Russia is not our friend or our ally. One might be able to understand a person's unwillingness to call another leader an enemy. That's a strong word. Some reasonable people might hesitate to use that language. Someone who doesn't attack everyone every day on Twitter might hesitate. But this is coming from a president who regularly refers to the American press as, quote, the enemy of the people, end quote. New York Times, February 17, 2017, quote, Trump calls the news media the enemy of the American people, end quote. USA Today, February 24, 2017, quote, Trump again calls media enemy of the people, end quote. Just last month, the staff of the Capital Gazette, the Maryland paper where a gunman killed 5 people, said in a letter, and I quote, "We won't forget being called an enemy of the people. No, we won't forget that, because exposing evil, shining light on wrongs, and fighting injustice is what we do," end quote. And just days before that shooting on June 25th at a rally in South Carolina, the president again called the press the enemy of the people. Now, when the president talks this way about his fellow citizens, calling them enemies of the people, when the president talks this way about professionals who are critical to guaranteeing the rights enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution, making sure that they're faithfully carried out, but is somehow too hesitant to call the current ruthless leader of Russia a foe or even an adversary, that should give everybody pause. You ought to let that sink in. This is not some real estate deal where you're trying to underbid competitors. This is the very serious matter of ensuring the safety and stability of the Western Alliance. But President Trump kicked off the current NATO meeting by attacking Germany, claiming, I quote, "Germany is totally controlled by Russia," end quote. Maybe I'm mistaken, but last time I checked, Germany is one of our strongest allies. I don't know what's wrong with this president. It's appalling for the president to attack the American press corps and our NATO allies while praising totalitarian leaders in places like Russia and North Korea and sidling up to ruthless strongmen in the Philippines and Turkey. The behavior is shocking, and we should speak with one voice condemning it. Now, maybe at least the process for this reauthorization bill is a baby step in the right direction, and I'm glad that the chairman and ranking member were able to come together on this year's intelligence bill. I'm glad because it's been a particularly rocky year for bipartisan action in the Intelligence Committee. I have some issues with this bill. I'm concerned. I'd like to see more transparency about the various wars that we're engaged in abroad, but I understand that there's a consensus here, and I will express those concerns on the floor. But the fact is, what is going on with Russia? They're meddling in our elections and our social media, and who knows what else is serious business. And this is a time when we should lock arms as Americans and stand together. That is what the Senate Intelligence Committee did. That is what our intelligence community did in their own serious, thoughtful analysis. But unfortunately, this committee, and the Republican-led House Intelligence Committee, chose to politicize the Russia investigation. I'm not alone here. You know, our former colleague, Joe Scarborough, called the report, quote, "made for talk radio," end quote. And our current colleague, Republican Congressman Tom Rooney, who is on the Intel Committee, said, and I quote, "we've gone completely off the rails, and now we're basically a political forum for people to leak information to drive the day's news," end quote. So I think it's important to state for the record that many of us are tired of the majority prioritizing the next soundbite that earns the president's praises. And I want us to work together to put what's best for our country first, because our democracy is at stake, and that should come before political party. You know, I'm the co-chair of the bipartisan Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. I know about the systematic torture and killings of the Putin regime, its assault on freedom and its restrictions on the press. I think I can't believe my Republican friends aren't aware of this as well. You also ought to be aware that these attacks occur at the direction of Vladimir Putin and his top allies, and they do so with impunity. So this is the kind of leader that the president is cozying up to while he attacks our allies, and none of us should be offering the president cover on that matter. So to the Republican majority here, I would urge you to speak up and certainly stop trying to defend something that is so indefensible. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman for his time and his observations. I will be one of the first ones to speak up and say, I think protecting this country is one of the greatest things that our CIA does, that our NSA does, and other intelligence agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and that the United States of America is lucky to have not only devoted people in these areas, but people who do sound the alarm and are making sure that we are awake at a time when others may accept mediocrity. I want to recognize our distinguished panel that we have, including the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo, who asked me, Chairman Nunes asked, and so I'm notifying the gentleman now, that Mr. Nunes has to go back to a markup at Ways and Means Committee, and we're going to ask that the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiondo, be allowed to sit on this panel, and then if there are any questions, if Mr. Chairman Nunes has to leave, that Chairman Lobiondo would be in that place. So we're going to proceed that way. Both of you recognize you're no strangers to this committee. Anything you brought in writing, we'd appreciate, as is proper for you to leave anything in writing that may be spoken about in this context for awesome stenographer. So without objection, that'll be under the record. The distinguished gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. Appreciate being before you again. This marks another milestone of another year, another bipartisan bill out of this committee. I want to thank you in advance for allowing me to attend the markup so I don't miss, or I limit the number of votes I'm going to miss at the Ways and Means Committee markup. This year, our bill is named after Matthew Young Pollard, who is a longtime Senate staff on the Senate Intelligence Committee who passed away unexpectedly. And so both the Senate and our bill have the same name this year. And this year's bill actually combines last year's bill because the Senate was unable to pass the legislation that we moved out of the House, I believe with, I think, 380 votes last year. And so we're looking for another big vote, as this is critical legislation for our warfighters and our intelligence services. Specifically, I want to highlight just a few things, but Mr. Chairman, you mentioned this about the countering the threats to China. Our committee has an ongoing study into China. We've held one open hearing already this year. We're going to have another open hearing next week. But then there's also 7, I think, additional pieces of information in this legislation that you might find informative. First of all, we improve retention and recruitment of personnel for our cyber missions, which you said you went out to the NSA and had those briefings. So it's tough for us to recruit, so it hopefully is going to help in that recruitment and retention of those types of experts. Defends against foreign threats to elections. 3, protects key energy infrastructure. Authorizes enhanced injury benefits to CIA employees. Bolsters intelligence oversight. Improves IC accountability to Congress. And requires the FBI to provide quarterly counterintelligence briefings to Congress. In addition to supporting the IC's critical mission to protect the U.S. and the FY18 and FY19 Intelligence Authorization Act serves as one of the most important and effective mechanisms by which Congress can conduct rigorous and continuous oversight of the IC. Ultimately, this bipartisan bill ensures that dedicated men and women of our IC have the funding, authorities, and support they need to carry out their mission and keep us safe, while maintaining accountability and strict oversight of intelligence programs and activities. And with that, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, I appreciate your indulgence, but Mr. Lobiando is a longtime member of the Intelligence Committee. He chairs our CIA subcommittee and is a longtime member of the Armed Services Committee, so he is well-versed to answer any questions you may have on the specifics of this legislation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Schiff, does that mean you're exiting now? Excuse me just a moment, sorry. Does that mean you'd like to go now?
I was, if
okay.
I may.
If the gentleman hold just 1 second. Is there anyone on the committee that would wish to engage the distinguished gentleman in particular in anything at this time, knowing that he'd be gone, knowing the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Chairman Lobiando, would be taking his place?
We don't have any objections.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. If you'll
Your
please, anything you brought in writing for the awesome stenographer to enable her to complete that record. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And I'd like to thank Chairman Nunes for his work with me.
Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me just a second, please. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I did not know that. Mrs. Torres?
Thank you.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Nunes, finding number 32 of your committee's report on Russian active measure, or the Russian meddling report, was that you found that Jared Kushner, Donald Trump Jr., and Paul Manafort attended a meeting at Trump Tower for the purpose of receiving materials on candidate Clinton. That directly contradicts the statement that Jared Kushner provided to Congress last year. In other words, he directly lied.
Excuse me just a moment, please. Excuse me just a moment, please. Gentleman, please suspend.
Well, she just asked. She could,
My point here, directly to the legislation, is if we're hearing testimony and we have a report here, I want to know the witnesses that have been before this committee, have they lied? And if they have lied, what has...
Mr. Chairman, hold on a second. Is the gentlelady accusing the gentleman of lying?
Excuse me.
Not our
Excuse me.
witnesses.
If
Their
the gentlewoman please suspend, I would like to engage the gentlewoman. Does the gentlewoman intend to ask a line of questioning that deals with the legislation
Yes, I
or
do.
a report from the committee?
Yes, I do.
So it deals directly with this legislation that we have in hand,
Yes.
not the integrity of a member or a report of a member.
No.
the gentlewoman.
The integrity of a witness is part
Well,
of the report.
that is not, excuse me just a moment, please. I would like to ask that our members please recognize that we are dealing with a piece of legislation, not the integrity of a witness. The integrity of the witness, as it may be often noted, come to us on a political, bipartisan, or partisan basis. And I have never, and this committee should not ever, impugn a witness nor assume based upon a belief or disbelief of a political objective. And I would ask the gentlewoman, and I would ask the gentleman as the ranking member, to please offer an evaluation of that. And so we will be in recess for 5 minutes.
Well, if I can,
We will be in recess for 5 minutes. Please come back to my
after they handed me that, I would want to ask you all to respond to it when the time presents itself. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with shit. Yeah, look at starting here. The administration objects to this section. They object to that section. It goes, yeah, it goes on and on.
Committee will come to order. Distinguished gentlemen, I apologize for the time which I have consumed. If you would like to go to your markup, you will be replaced by the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey. It's the gentleman's call. Thank you very much. Gentlewoman may continue.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I thought the original question was if anyone had questions for Mr. Nunez, he'd wait. And
yes, sir.
Mrs. Torres did, and now.
And also, for several minutes, you'd indicated you did not have any additional questions.
I did not, but a member of our panel did.
So
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
If you would yield, in the interim, while you were about your business, the administration's policy was handed out to us. In reviewing it, I came to the conclusion that there were questions that I wanted to ask Mr. Nunez and Mr. Schiff regarding the administration's policy. It's not cured now. He is already gone, but I think that circumvents our responsibilities, and I, for one, am in firm disagreement with his having left. This is our committee. All of us have responsibilities all over the place, and I think you know that we continuously are mindful of members' other responsibilities. But if he had to go vote at Ways and Means, he's going to get many more opportunities to vote on the same crap that he's going there to vote on.
Yes, sir. I appreciate hearing from you. Excuse me just a moment, please. Chairman Lobiondo, could you please tell me your service to the Intel community, the committee, and how long you've been on the committee and what you've served as vice chairman of or your service?
I'm finishing my 8th year, and I've since Chairman Nunes has been involved, I've been chairing the CIA committee.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask our other witness, Mr. Schiff, do you believe that notwithstanding that the chairman of the committee is not here, and it is because of a markup, that you would have any reason to believe that we should stop this hearing or not allow the gentleman, Mr. Lobiondo, to sit in for any other reason of lack of information or clarity the gentleman may offer?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what to recommend to you on that. I can certainly present my own views on the bill. A number of the provisions the administration has taken issue with are provisions the majority sought to include, so they'd be in a better position to defend them. I would think that, and we're both majority and minority just getting this statement of policy now,
yes, sir.
That we will work on addressing these concerns as we move forward with the legislation. But in terms of my colleagues' questions, I really don't know how to evaluate that because I don't know the questions in particular that my colleagues have.
Let me be more specific. You have known Mr. Lobiondo as a regular member of your committee who has utilized his judgment and service to regularly attend and would be aware of the issues that would be presented within this piece of legislation. Do you believe that would be true and correct?
Mr. Lobiondo has been a great member of the committee, and I'm sure that he's more than capable of discussing issues that have come up in the committee. If some of the gentlewoman's questions go to the Russia investigation, those might be issues that Mr. Lobiondo was less directly engaged in, but I will leave that to the members and Mr. Lobiondo to respond on that. And so all I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, is I will comply with whatever the committee would like on my part.
Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me just a moment, please. Gentleman.
Yeah, first of all, we have no problem, and we certainly respect Mr. Lobiondo. He's an able member. He served on the Intelligence Committee. He's a respected member of this body. But there was a rule in this committee, or at least we all kind of abided by, that when a chairperson came to testify, or a ranking member or testify, anybody came to testify, that until everybody had a chance to question that person, they were not allowed to leave. So this is precedent setting here. And as Mr. Schiff pointed out, there are some things that Mr. Lobiondo may be perfectly fine with answering. There are other things that, based on the subject matter, that only Chairman Nunes would be the appropriate person. So this is all new. I understand what's going on. People wanted to get Mr. Nunes out of here so he didn't have to answer Mrs. Torres's questions. I get it, but we've never seen this kind of process where, I mean, we've had members here who have tried to get up and leave, and you've called them back.
That's correct.
Right. So, but but somehow Chairman Nunes is exempt from that, and so we do object to this process, and we wanted the record to reflect that we're deeply disappointed. And so, in any event, I yield back to you.
And thank you very much. I respect that. Gentleman yields back his time. What I would like to do is to say that the effort today is not about an amendment. It is about a piece of legislation. It's about a piece of legislation that the distinguished gentleman from California, the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, I believe, have expert witness ability and testimony. And that what we're holding the hearing for today is a piece of legislation, not a hearing. It is something that would be widely understood, and I do respect and appreciate, without objection, I'd like to enter the record the statement of administration procedure and policy that would be entered, the SAP. I have not read that SAP myself either, and I respect that neither of you may have gotten a copy. I'd like to ask the clerk if she could please make sure that both of our witnesses have a copy of that, and it's seemingly that they do at this time. I did that before. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. policy or precedent or anything else, I viewed that I updated up front that the gentleman had another hearing. It was established, and so Mr. Lobiondo, we're going to have you sit in as you entered from the very top of this as the expert witness on behalf of the Intelligence Committee, on behalf of the young chairman. The gentlewoman is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to put to the record that when I began my question, I was cut off, and members of this body assumed that I was politicking on an issue, and I resent the fact that I was not allowed to finish asking my question. I actually do have additional questions that I wish you could answer for me, but they're directed at the chairman, and therefore, I'm not able to ask any of my questions.
So the gentleman does not choose to ask any further questions. Thank you very much. We'll now move to the testimony from the distinguished gentleman from California. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and at the risk of offering a gratuitous suggestion, maybe we can present to you now, and if your hearing goes beyond the Ways and Means, perhaps the chairman could come back and continue his testimony.
I am not opposed to any of that at all, and would hope that anyone in the room that would choose to pay attention to that hearing, and I would request that Chairman Nunes would come back, and I have no objection that the gentleman knows that we had previously scheduled this. I was unaware of the Ways and Means Committee. We have other committee hearings that are going on also at this time, and it's just a difficult time on a Wednesday afternoon to do that. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member and our former esteemed HPSI colleague, Alcee Hastings. For well over a year now, considerable attention has been focused on our committee and the profound disagreements that the chairman and I have had over the Russia investigation. Those disagreements remain, but as I've consistently maintained, the Intelligence Committee must continue with our other work on as bipartisan a basis as possible. Our national security requires it, and we owe our intelligence professionals nothing less than that, not only because they put themselves at personal risk every day, but also because their work is so important to the country that it demands nothing less than the shared responsibility and oversight of the Congress. And I'm pleased to say that I support the Matthew Young Pollard Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal years 2018 and 2019. The Intel Committee has a history of producing bipartisan bills, even under difficult political circumstances, and I'm pleased that our staffs work to reach a mutually acceptable final text and to weed out any provisions that would have made it impossible to move forward jointly. Much of the committee's oversight work as reflected in the bill is classified, but we can discuss some of the 2019 Intelligence Authorization Act's elements openly, including the fact that the bill ensures that we're making important efforts to prevent our elections from being interfered with or manipulated. This is obviously essential to our democracy, and the bill includes important provisions that continue the work we've been doing in the committee during the course of the Russia investigation and in our normal oversight to maintain the integrity of our election system. The bill also ensures that our intelligence community is able to meet all threats from terrorism to non-state actors. The bill authorizes a funding across a wide range of endeavors that will allow the IC and Defense Department to not only respond to threats but to preempt them. The bill also takes steps to prevent a repeat of the Russian active measures campaign that targeted the 2016 election by including a minority author provision requiring a briefing to key congressional leaders, including some members of the Intelligence Committee, if the U.S. faces a significant foreign cyber intrusion or active measures campaign directed at a federal election. It also ensures that America's traditional advantage in technology remains a priority for our intelligence services. As such, the bill resources and directs efforts that will promote our advantages across a range of cross-cutting domains from space to artificial intelligence. The bill also ensures transparency and allows public access to certain work of the IC. The bill reauthorizes for 10 years the Public Interest Declassification Review Board, which advises the President and executive branch agencies on the review and declassification of IC records of historic importance. In the end, the men and women who serve in the intelligence community and DoD are the most important factor in the success of our national security, and the bill includes some minority provisions related to parental leave, student loan repayment, and diversity inclusiveness that are intended to make an exceptional workforce even better. There are many other things in the bill that will build on the work of past years and move us further along technical and other pathways to meet new challenges and those still on the horizon. The bill is not perfect, no bill is, but it is a good bill and one that I expect will be further improved via amendment when the full House considers it on the floor. And I'm pleased to support it and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Mr. Schiff, thank you very much. Mr. Schiff, I believe you know that the Rules Committee has for a number of years, including the period of time that the distinguished gentleman from Florida, Judge Hastings, sat on this important committee, been concerned about information, classified, private, other information that was revealed or leaked or provided. Do you believe that today there are proper rules, regulations, and balances for you and the committee to be able to recognize and associate leaks that come out of that and to be able to respond to them accordingly, knowing that a few weeks ago we've had members of the United States Senate who presumptively, without finding a conclusion of any lawfulness that may have committed, that we have the right balance in providing information, the media, to keep our nation's secrets secret?
Chairman, I think it's there are a couple dimensions to that question. There's the issue of leaks that come from the executive branch or leaks that come from the legislative branch. Then there is the problem, which I think is far larger in scope, and that is leaks that come from insiders to WikiLeaks, et cetera. And, those kind of leaks have been phenomenally costly in terms of some of our closely held secrets, and also have caused innumerable problems for us around the world. There are a whole category of other problems associated with other kind of leaks that come out of either this building or the one down the street at 1600 Pennsylvania. I don't know that this bill or any other bill will be a perfect cure-all. The most serious concern I have are those leaks that jeopardize national security. And I think in that respect, we still have a lot of work to do to be able to assure that our own workforce, the contractor workforce, is properly vetted, that there are mechanisms to detect people who are accessing files they have no business accessing, that are having contact with persons they have no business having contact with. I still fear we have some distance to go. Some of that can be legislated, a lot of it can't. It's management, and that's something that we have to continue to keep a strong focus on.
But you do recognize that balance and that we're trying to do the things that are necessary, and you believe that a balance does exist in that area? I do believe that we are trying to strike the right balance, make sure that we stop any leaks coming out of our building, that we make sure that the investigative authorities have the resources they need to investigate when there are leaks. But probably most important from my point of view is that we keep the heat on our agencies to make sure that they're putting in place the protocols necessary to prevent the kind of massive losses that can be that could take place when you have an insider decide they're simply going to publish at will the nation's secrets. And that would be the last question. Do you believe that this new administration properly balances that effort to make sure that they are aware of the need to watch, take care, and be aware of those sorts of circumstances within their agencies?
Well, I do think that certainly the agencies and the administration understand and take seriously the threat from insider leaks of information. In terms of the administration's own record on its own leaks, in my experience, certainly there have been leaks that have come from the Hill. More often, there are leaks that have come from the administration, and sometimes the leaks that come from the administration have been blamed on the Hill for strategic and political reasons. That's a really messy problem beyond our power to fix legislatively. But I do think in probably the most important arena, and that is, do the people we entrust at these agencies, can we be confident that they will keep the nation's confidence? I think that the administration and the agencies are well aware of the magnitude of the problem and are taking steps to address it.
Yes, sir. Follow up then. What I'm simply referring to is, are those agencies, have they learned their lesson about their own employees walking out with massive amounts of data, and that they have taken the necessary steps to perhaps to understand and be more careful themselves? I'm talking about the agency, not of any political necessary element that may be placed on them, but the agencies themselves.
And I have to be careful in how much I can say on this.
Yes or no would be fine with me.
I think that the agencies have been too long to come to grips with what needs to be done to address this problem.
Right. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, by the way. I've watched you throughout the year and a half, and I have found your comments, your professionalism, and your in-depth analysis complimentary to this body, and I want to thank you very much. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, I mean, given the chairman's line of questioning, it would have been nice to have Chairman Nunes here to ask about his conduct during the Russia investigation and the leaks to the press and the leaks and the coordination with the administration, but he's no longer here, so I have no questions.
Gentleman does not seek additional time. Distinguished gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Chairman, I wish to be heard, and I thank
Gentleman's
you
recognized.
so very much. First, Mr. Chairman, let me put on record that I served with both the gentlemen, Mr. Lobianda, a little bit less than I did with Mr. Schiff on the House Intelligence Committee. I was vice chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and I know how important the work is that you all and the respective staffs do in putting together a bill like the one we have before us today. As a matter of fact, I see a couple of the staff members that I've worked with both in the committee and overseas at different times during the time that I was there. As Mr. Schiff has put it, and Mr. Nunes before he left, there are certainly laudable provisions in this bill. And I support the fact that it builds upon the work that's being done to ensure diversity through the intelligence community. And I think certainly Mr. Schiff will recognize, and Mr. Lobiando, the work of Lou Stokes and Julian Dixon before any of us served on the committee in addressing the subject of diversity. I consider it to be important enough that I've pushed up an amendment that doesn't only include diversity as we generally understand it, but also to try to get on the committee people that come from some of our rural communities in America, not on the committee, but on the staff. I support that the bill takes on the issues of parental leave and student loan repayment, because I know those are very important issues for indispensable people who make up our country's intelligence community. And I support the work that has been done in writing this bill to ensure that, as you put it, Mr. Schiff, transparency is increased so that the American people can be more fully aware of what's being done in their name. Now, I do have reservations about the tools this bill will give the current administration, an administration that has since day one, in my considered opinion, undermined and belittled some of the brave men and women who work in the intelligence community. It's just one example of this behavior. I'd note the fact that the present administration and the present president, and this should be astounding to anyone born before 1990, or really anyone who has read a grade school history book, he takes the word of the gentleman that he's going to meet with next week, Mr. Putin, over our own intelligence community. And how do I know that? Well, no less than January 6th, the intelligence community released an assessment of Russia's influence campaign that was aimed at our 2016 presidential election. In that assessment, the CIA, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Security Agency stated the following: we assess Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. We further assess that Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump, and we have high confidence in these judgments. Again, that's the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA coming to that conclusion. Now, the president, as is his right, disputes that assessment. He's reached his assessment in a rather peculiar way, in my judgment. He asked Putin straight up, did you meddle in the election? And Putin answered, no. And there you have it. Actually, to be fair to the president, let me quote him verbatim. Talking to reporters on Air Force One last November, President Trump said, in answer to a question as to whether the Russians meddled in our election, he said he didn't meddle, according to Trump. He said he didn't meddle. I asked him again. You can only ask so many times, but I just asked him again, and he said he absolutely did not meddle in our election. He did not do what they're saying he did. Now, what a magnificent interrogation. Luckily for us, the president will be able to continue the interrogation in a couple of days when he has his private meeting. If any of you have any influence with anyone that's traveling with the president, tell him to be sure to make sure that the room that he and Putin are meeting in is swept at least to the degree that they can come to a conclusion that their personal conversation, which is unprecedented, I might add, in diplomacy in regards presidents, does not take place in that way. Ranking Member Schiff, do you, in your assessment, believe that there are countries that wish to harm America and American interests through the use of cyber warfare?
That is certainly true, Mr. Hastings, and I think the countries with probably the most capable cyber arsenals are Russia, China, Iran to a lesser degree, North Korea to a lesser degree, all of which have shown a willingness to use those capabilities either for massive intellectual property theft in the case of China, exfiltration of data on Americans in the case of China, interference in our elections in the case of Russia, probing our infrastructure in the case of Russia, probing our infrastructure in the case of Iran, attacking American companies in the case of North Korea. So there's certainly abundant evidence.
In addition to the fact that there are rogues out there that may not be state-sponsored, but come from many of those places as well as a handful of others. Would I also be correct that the trend lines for cyber threat is on the incline?
Absolutely. Those threats are just going to become greater.
And it goes without saying, does it not, that this is a complex issue that cuts across any number of agencies' interests and equities. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So would it make sense for us to have a person dedicated or persons dedicated to overseeing how these threats are being assessed?
In my opinion, the magnitude of this threat cannot be overstated, and the degree to which it's going to occupy more and more of our time and thought is really difficult to fathom. So something of that broad sweep and severity in terms of the threat it poses certainly, I think calls for somebody at the highest levels to have a
And
permanent focus on this.
we had such a person that was National Security Council cybersecurity coordinator. And what wound up happening is this administration decided that they would take that away. I won't go very much further, just in the interest of time. I do want to compliment the minority report that does take into consideration the need for talent. I think both of you, both when I was on the committee and at other times, have heard me say rather repeatedly that languages, well, let's use North Korea, for example. We really don't have the greatest capability, aside from our ability to overfly them and gain information, but we don't have great ability to go on the ground in many of these places, and that's why we need to recruit a diverse workforce, and I hope the committee will make my amendment in order, which I will have an opportunity to speak to later. I did pass out to you, Mr. Lobayando. I don't know whether you had an opportunity. I saw Mr. Nunes reading the statement of administration policy. I'm not confused, but how do you all reconcile the product that you have produced with what appears from the administration to be contrary to many sections that have written? I saw you read it, Mr. Schiff. What's your assessment of this administration? And then, if you would, Mr. Lobayando, I'd appreciate it.
Well, as I look through the administration statement, the overall objection seems to be the degree to which the administration feels that we're micromanaging how they ought to manage the IC enterprise. So it doesn't, and now it caveats by saying it needs to review our classified annex, but it doesn't seem to take issue with our priorities, with our funding levels, with where we're making our investments. But it does seem to take issue with the degree to which the Congress is telling them how to run their agencies. And this is not a fight that's uniform to this administration. We've had this with the last administration. We'll have it with the next one. And this will have to be the product of negotiation as the bill moves forward.
Right. Mr. Lobayando, I don't know whether you had an opportunity to review, so I don't want to be unfair.
No, that's okay. I did not have an opportunity to read it, but I listened to some comments from my colleague here, and the committee takes its oversight responsibility very seriously. I think, as we may have witnessed sometimes in the past, the administration may not have been privy to all the discussions that we've had on a bipartisan basis and the reasoning behind what we've done. So we will engage in discussions with the administration and address in discussions with the Senate, and I'm sure in a very satisfactory manner.
Right, I certainly hope so, and I appreciate both you gentlemen in that regard. Mr. Chairman, let me take a moment of personal privilege, if you don't mind. I have 3 interns.
Oh, yes, sir.
That are here with me. Ayanna Barker, young lady in the back over there, and Sarah Powell. They're here, and this is 2 of them. This is their 3rd meeting to come here to the Rules Committee. I don't know how much these children need to be bored, but evidently they like it here. But I also
sometimes they're good theater.
Yeah, I also have the distinct honor to have one of my real cousins. I don't have but a handful of them left in life, but Sierra Pettiford is also one of our interns this year. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add to anyone that is here and has been here that the committee wants, needs, and expects to be polite, professional, and straightforward. And at no time would I expect that my behavior would be demeaning to any member of this guest, to any guest, or to any member of the committee. And I would like to state that if I have violated that in any way, I apologize, but I believe that what we're attempting to do today is to look at legislation that would be important. And so it's my hope that the guests that we have that did witness a bit of theater would recognize these happen in processes that we're in here. And Judge Hastings has been a part of this committee for a long time and been a part of that theater before. And I have been a part of this body for quite some time and the theater that came in there. But Judge, we have a gentleman from Richardson, Texas, who I've met twice, who's here with his beautiful young daughter who goes to the University of Texas. And this gave him a chance to see his congressman engaged in, and I am concerned also that my behavior would be proper to people back home. And so I lay myself before that also. And so I want to thank you for inviting your guest here today. The gentleman from Colorado. The gentleman does not seek any time. The distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to mention, since I get to serve with Mr. Lobiondo on the Transportation Committee, I get a chance to listen to the reverence with which he talks about his work on the Intelligence Committee. We spend so much time on the floor thinking about theater, talking about the us against them as if it's Republicans and Democrats, as opposed to, in some cases, where it's Article 1, Article 2, as Mr. Schiff just pointed out, and in other cases where it's lovers of freedom versus those who hate freedom around the globe. And this will be the last time we see Mr. Lobiondo in the transportation context, Chairman Lobiondo, before the Committee on Issues of Intel Reauthorization. But I want to thank him. He shared with me early on in my tenure here, Mr. Chairman, what it means to, as you sometimes say, to make the main thing the main thing. Yes, sir. And it has been a privilege to learn from him in that way, and I want to thank him for his service on the committee for these many years.
I'd like to thank the gentleman from Georgia and appreciate your comments very much, and it's been a tremendous honor serving with you, and a lot of your comments on the, obviously not from this committee, but on transportation, I've learned a lot from too, so thank you very much.
Yeah, with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Yields back his time. I will also say I'm going to miss seeing Tina as much too. So that's Frank's beautiful young wife. Does anyone else seek time? Does gentlewoman seek time? Gentlewoman does not seek time. Does gentleman from Freedom, Colorado seek time? Gentleman does not seek time. I want to thank both of you for being here today, for addressing this important legislation, and I want to thank both of you for your service. Your staff, both staffs, have been at the forefront of questions, observations, and have received a lot of visitors down to your skiff. I want both of you to know how important your service is, not only to the secrecy of this nation's secrets, but also your protection thereof from a balanced perspective. And I want to thank both of you very much for your time today. If you'll please make sure, Mr. Chairman Lobiondo, that anything you brought in writing would be left for us, the stenographer, and the same would be for the distinguished gentleman from California. Adam, I hope you'll tell your dad I said hi. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now going to move to the phase of the hearing where we ask witnesses if they would choose to come give testimony. And the distinguished gentlewoman from Houston, Texas, home of the Houston Astros. Yes, ma'am. We're delighted that you're here. I think gentlewoman knows that your opportunity to come here to the committee is of value to not only the people of your district, but also of your service to the country. Please do remember that without objection, anything you brought in writing will be in the record. Distinguished gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and certainly appreciated your comments to the distinguished audience. Let me start again. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, to the ranking member. I appreciate your comments. We all represent constituents, and they all see us operating, and I believe it's important for us to reflect the values and affection we have for this place. I am not, will not take up your time long. you sort of touched me, Mr. Hastings, when you mentioned interns, and so I'm wearing an insignia that's pink and green, and I would be remiss if I didn't comment on my interns who are not in place, but we hosted in Houston 19,000 women from the Alpha Kappa Alpha, and I have interns who are that, and I just want to acknowledge them, since you all have acknowledged interns, even though they're not
Yes, ma'am, we're
here.
delighted that you would bring them to the committee also.
Thank you so very much. Let me indicate that I'm going to collectively speak of my amendments number 32 and 33 and 32, 33, and 34, and I am submitting the modified amendment, which I believe is, and the staff should help me with that, I believe the modified amendment is number 33. That has been modified by the committee. I'm submitting that into the record. So let me just speak collectively of those three, and then I have another amendment. I do want to make mention of the amendment number 32. The gist of my amendments is to suggest that individuals who have security clearance, when their behavior changes or when we are about to give security clearance, we really should be looking at any number of issues. I know that as clearances are done, I've had one before I came to the United States Congress, many questions are asked, but I believe there should be triggers that considers the applicant's membership in a hate group and their participation in activities espoused by hate groups that involve violence or incitement of violence which disrupts civic life. Amendment number 33, I think, captures all three of the amendments, so I'll spend more time on that amendment, which the whole idea is that if you have a security clearance and it is discovered that you have behavior that is intended to undermine anyone's constitutional rights because of disability, race, ethnicity, and their views, that clearance should be taken away or that it should be disrupted. And a prime example is this article, individual who was in Charlottesville, I guess a year ago, as a member of a violent white supremacist group, and he was working for a defense contractor with a security clearance, and it never was removed. Even though he was videotaped, it was removed when it became a story. And I think it is important that we are particularly attentive to those who receive security clearances. There are many further details that I can give. We be reminded of certainly those individuals that have been ultimately tried for spying. That's probably a different category, but security clearances, I think, need extra enhanced attention because of the focus now on people being targeted because of their race, religion, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, and inflicting physical harm on those individuals or emotional distress with the objective of normalizing antisocial behavior towards vulnerable groups. So again, I'm speaking to amendments 32, 33, and 34, but I want to emphasize amendment number 33, which the Rules Committee has modified, and I am accepting the modification of that amendment and hope that it will be accepted. I will now move to amendment number 38. And this amendment was accepted last year, and I would hope that the committee would accept this as well. This requires the Director of National Intelligence to conduct an assessment and report to Congress on the reliance of intelligence activities that are done by civilian contractors to support government activities, including intelligence analysis. And I think the prime character, if you will, in this story and the reason for my amendment and hopefully the acceptance last year and hopefully again was Mr. Snowden, who was a private contractor buried in a faraway location, I believe, in my recollection, in Hawaii, and was seemingly without much oversight to allow him to trip, if you will, the system and to create great misery, not as a whistleblower, but in fact, I believe, as something more enhanced and as I believe, committing treason. So I know that we rely upon civilian contractors who focus whose expertise is intelligence. I've met many of them, but I think it is extremely important that we are attentive to the number of civilian contractors that are involved in our intelligence area, and I would think that it would be important for Congress to have that reported to them in a classified manner, if appropriate, but that we should know how much of our intelligence is relying upon civilian support systems and to the extent that they are not under the immediate umbrella or location of the CIA and other intelligence components. Certainly, we have a number of intelligence components throughout the executive. With that, I ask my colleagues to consider my amendments, the one as modified, number 33, and the other amendments, and then amendment number 38 regarding civilian contractors. And I yield.
Thank you very much. Ms. Jackson-Lee, do you believe that there is any necessarily, I know you held up an article that was an indication by perhaps a DOD employee, or you've raised these issues before. What has been the general consensus in talking to people like your Intelligence Committee members? Have they brought these up in some discussion in their meetings, and has this been discussed? I'm not trying to invade anything about your intent or what their intent, but this seemingly would be a problem to me. The integrity of a person's evaluation, the integrity of a person's personal behavior while they were being employed by the government, the integrity of the work product. Is this an ongoing thing, or is this simply, as we see, a sense of Congress? Because this seems to be, of any area of government, it would bother me if it were Treasury, if it were Commerce, but in particular where they were entrusted with this national security sort of authorization about them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the question, and I am on the Subcommittee on Intelligence on Homeland Security. They have a subcommittee on that. But what I would say to you is, and the amendment number 38 is in fact not a sense of Congress. It requires the Director of National Intelligence to conduct an assessment and report.
I do see that, yes.
So, but yes, I think Edward Snowden seems like a long way away. Mr. Snowden, excuse me, seems a long way away. But I think it has his behavior as it began to unfold. First, people were trying to glean as to whether or not he was a young, innocent whistleblower. And as we began to factoid, if you will, we could see that there were many paths that he could have taken. So that upset a lot of our committee members discussing the fact of faraway contractors that are not even in the arena of Washington, D.C. and beyond in certain areas. How many exist like that? How many are overseas? And that began. And then certainly Charlottesville, or the rise of hate crimes, when I say hate crime, hate speech, which we know that there is a First Amendment right. But the idea of this was if someone was intimidating someone else and you have a security clearance, it doesn't seem to be comporting to the work that we do. What is a security clearance? It is national security. It's protecting the American people. It's finding out bad things and giving it to the appropriate people so they can protect us. And it doesn't seem that that person should keep their security clearance if they have one. And so that's amendment number 33, which indicates that if you determine that this person is acting in a way that undermines individuals for their differences, threatening them, then they should not maintain their security clearance. Now, that is a sense of Congress.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is there any other member that would seek to discuss these amendments? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Just want to say we support making the gentlelady's amendments in order.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would seek time? Anyone else that seek time? I want to. Well, and that's where I've got you right here. Judge Alcee Hastings and Ms. Torres both, you got that big arrow here, and we're going to go to you next. So thank you, and thank you for helping me out, because in fact I would not want to in any way not give either of you the time that's necessary. Ms. Jackson-Lee, if you'll please make sure you leave for awesome stenographer anything that you brought in writing that would help us to not only look back at the record, but be aware of the importance of the things that you brought to the committee today. I want to thank you very much for your attention to detail, brevity, and the opportunity to discuss this with the committee today.
Chairman, I thank you, and I ask unanimous consent to place this article in the record.
It's already been given. Anything you brought, writing will be into the record, and I appreciate the gentleman very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the Rules Committee, Ranking Member. And
Yes,
members.
ma'am, and thank you very much for your time. Now, we're going to move now to, as I do not see any other member that is seeking time for the committee, so we're going to move to the committee members that might have amendments, and obviously the gentleman will go first, and he may either go there or to the witness table. The gentleman's
With the
recognized.
chairman's permission, I'll just stay.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First, my amendment number 9 deals with the subject of diversity, which I've already spoken to Mr. Schiff and others about, and I ask unanimous consent that the committee print and my statement be made a part of
Without
the
objection.
record on that one. Mr. Chairman, my amendment number 11 deals with the subject of cybersecurity, and I won't go into great detail regarding the same, but you heard me ask Mr. Schiff whether or not the trend line on cybersecurity is up, and it is, and we all know that, and therefore I pushed up an amendment that would allow for us to do what I asked Mr. Schiff, and he agreed, establish a cybersecurity coordinator for the intelligence community. And toward that end, I won't belabor the point. I ask unanimous consent that my full statement in support of my amendment number 11 be made a part of the record.
Without objection, Judge, will include
With that, I
also
yield back, Mr. Chairman.
with the knowledge that you are now giving that to our awesome photographer. Thank you very much. We're now going to move to the gentlewoman from California. Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wish to speak on 4 amendments I have offered to H.R. 6237, the Matthew Young Intelligence Authorization Act of 2018 and 2019. Amendment 1 directs the Director of National Intelligence in coordination with the Assistant Secretary of the State for State INR and the Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis that the Department of Treasury to provide Congress with an intelligence estimate on the North Korean regime's revenue sources. While we are very hopeful that progress is being made regarding denuclearization of North Korea, we need to ensure that we have more than handshakes and photo ops. This amendment, which is modeled after my North Korea Follow the Money Act, will prepare Congress and the administration should fruitful negotiations take place between the two nations. Prepared with this amendment, President Trump will be able to negotiate an effective agreement. An effective agreement will take into account all of the sources of funding, both legitimate and illegitimate, that have enabled this North Korea regime. I appreciate the assistance of Chairman Nunes and Ranking Member Schiff have offered me on this amendment, and I urge it be made in order. I also offered amendment number 5, which requires the advisory report on foreign counterintelligence and cybersecurity threats to include best practices for state and local governments. Mr. Chairman, we know that and understand that Russia's role in interfering in the 2018 election, and earlier this year, the Department of Homeland Security reported that Russia targeted 21 states' voter registration systems. In testimony to the State Intelligence Committee, Secretary Nielsen added that the threat for interference remains, and we recognize that the 2018 midterms and future elections are clearly potential targets for Russian hacking attempts. Providing best practices to our local governments will harden the front lines of our elections and protect them. We must extend assistance to state and local governments as all elections depend on a secure local institution. In addition, I have offered amendment number 7, which would require a report from the Director of National Intelligence to Congress on if Russia and other countries are using the horrific images of family separation as propaganda. Mr. Chairman, seeing families ripped apart is not the American I know, and I'm afraid that these images will define us around the world. The damage to the families we have harmed is irreversible. And as of today, roughly 50 children under the age of 5 still have not been reunited with their families. We don't know how many of the nearly 3,000 more children ages 6 to 18 have found their way back to their parents. This Congress should know how far the damage goes and how much of our standing as a leader for human rights has been compromised. Finally, have offered, with all of my Democratic colleagues on the Rules Committee, Amendment number 41. Mr. Chairman, this amendment is rather simple. It takes a widely accepted view of the Senate Intelligence Report regarding Russia attacks on our elections and inserts those findings at the end of the bill. The Senate report reaffirms what every U.S. intelligence agency has found, that the U.S. election was the target of a Russian operation directed by the Kremlin. At the very least, I think that the members of the House deserve a vote on this important amendment, and I urge the committee to make all of these amendments in order, and I yield back the rest of my time.
Okay, so the gentlewoman has now had an opportunity to present her amendments. Is there discussion to those?
We support them all.
Okay.
Enthusiastically.
Enthusiastically. I think my observations, I think it would be important to know some conclusion about meddling in elections and for somebody to draw some conclusion. I don't know that they have, and I really say this honestly, I don't know that they would be the correct ones. It might be somebody else that would actually look at the effects of national intelligence from the CA perspective to worry about what happened in this country. Perhaps it might be someone else, but I'm not going to argue that point. It might be someone, their focus is out, not in, but I'm not going to argue that point. Does anybody have any questions for Judge Hastings also as a presenter of his amendments? Seeing none, I want to thank both of you for your time and effort. Is there any other member that would seek time before the Rules Committee to discuss H.R. 6237? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of the hearing today, and will now, Chairman now being received a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 6237, the Matthew Young Pollard Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal years 2018 and 2019, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. The rule waives all points of order against considerations of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for purposes of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-80, and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. And finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
I want to thank the distinguished gentleman for his motion. I'm going to yield myself 1 minute. This is one rule, one bill, H.R. 6237, structured rule, 1 hour debate. Intel makes an order 11 amendments, 1 Republican, 10 Democrats, 1 bipartisan motion to recommit. I want to thank the gentleman for his motion. Is there amendment or discussion to this bill? Gentleman's recognized.
To the rule, move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for my amendment to H.R. 6237, number 11, which would amend the National Security Act to include in its list of statutorily required positions on the National Security Council a cybersecurity coordinator. The cybersecurity coordinator shall be paid at the rate of basic pay for level 3 of the executive schedule. Now, Mr. Chairman, we believe that this amendment is germane, and I'm not certain, after reviewing the amendments that were made in order, why this amendment would not be proper for floor debate. As I indicate all the time, I'm a member of this committee and a former member of the Intel Committee, and I asked specifically Mr. Schiff to address this subject, and it would seem to me that we should be able to bring this amendment to the floor, and perhaps you, Mr. Chairman, can tell me why this one was blocked.
Gentlemen, we'll suspend just for a moment, please. Yeah, 11. Gentleman has asked a question. I'm going to attempt to get a question. I'm aware of a good number of these that went through. I do not recall this one specifically, and the gentleman is entitled to my response.
Something is blocked, it came from you, and
well, there's truth to that.
All right. That said, let me venture a statement as to why I think it was blocked. It was blocked because the administration removed the cybersecurity coordinator. And I tried to not be partisan when I was speaking, but actually John Bolton is the person responsible for it having been moved. But why an amendment like this should be made in order, Mr. Chairman, very simply, is to bring out the importance of this particular position. And I don't think there's anybody in here that disagrees that cybersecurity is a substantially important issue for our country now and certainly in the future. And therefore, a debate, a wholesome debate, robust debate would benefit us in knowing, at least in the future, that such a Council on Cybersecurity should be a part of our administrative undertaking. Now, I do understand this, and I understand the dynamics of this administration believing, among other things, that bureaucracy should not be expanded. So I'll give them that as an argument, but in this particular area, I would think that an exception would be made. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm satisfied, and I yield.
Thank you very much. Further discussion? Gentlewoman?
I have an amendment.
Okay, we're going to see if we can stay on this one first. And so the Hastings amendment that's been presented before the committee, further discussion? Hearing none, the vote now be on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Gentlemen, ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Distinguished gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. Move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 6237 by me and my Democratic colleagues on the Rules Committee, number 41, which would insert at the end of the text the finding of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence with respect to the Intelligence Community Assessment, ICA, regarding Russian activities and intentions in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The provision would convert the committee's findings into finding of the entire Congress. Among other things, such findings describe the significant escalation in 2016 of Russia's longstanding attempt to interfere in U.S. domestic policies, in this case through a broad, a multifaceted active measures campaign. Proclaim the ICA to be a sound intelligence product, and note that Congress has seen additional examples of Russia's attempt to interfere in U.S. elections and those of our allies.
Thank you very much. I would note that the minority views have been included in this report from the U.S. House of Representatives. The minority views are in here, and those were available to people. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I strongly support this amendment, not only because I'm party to it along with every other Democrat on this panel, but because it's germane, and because I think we have an obligation to bring some credibility back to the Intelligence Committee's oversight responsibilities. By virtually all accounts, what happened in the House was, quite frankly, a mockery of the system. And I think we need to bring some credibility back to what the House Intelligence Committee does. I think we could do that by acknowledging that the Senate conducted itself in the way we should have conducted ourselves, in a truly bipartisan manner, and aimed at getting at the truth and not trying to circle the wagons around the President of the United States. And so I hope that this will be made in order. Again, it is germane, and we should have this debate and vote on it, and everybody can go on record.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I will add my comments. The minority, which is very capable, I believe that their leadership that was here today, Mr. Schiff, would have had every opportunity to include his views as he saw the world. This was a bipartisan piece of legislation where both sides appeared today as witnesses. Both sides communicated to me, I believe to the committee, their support of this bill as is, with the knowledge that the minority could have presumptively entered any report they had chosen. Further discussion?
Mr.
Yes,
Chairman, I didn't hear Ranking Member Schiff say that the bill was perfect or that it could be made better. And the whole point of the Rules Committee in this hearing, where people brought up amendments, was they wanted to make it better. So, I mean, that's what we do on all bills. So the idea that it wasn't included, and I think it would be difficult to have it included in a bill that is in a bill that comes out of a committee chaired by Mr. Nunez. I think we ought to have an opportunity to bring it to the floor and debate it, and we can vote on it.
Okay, that's fair. Further discussion? Seeing none, the vote now be on the Torres Amendment. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Noes have it. Gentlewoman asks for a roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne. No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Buck. No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
Yep.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion. Distinguished gentlewoman from California.
I have an en bloc amendments.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for my amendments to H.R. 6237. Amendment number 5 would require the advisory report on foreign counterintelligence and cybersecurity threats to election campaigns, summarizing best practices for federal offices to also include state and local offices. And number 7, which would require a report from the Director of National Intelligence to Congress on the use of U.S. policy on family separation as propaganda by foreign governments, including Russia, to interfere and undermine the moral credibility of the U.S.
Thank you very much. Discussion. Vote now be on the en bloc amendment presented by the gentlewoman from California. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Noes have it.
Recorded vote.
Gentlewoman asks for a recorded vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, no. Mr. Byrne. No. Mr. Byrne, no. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Buck. No. Mr. Buck, no. Ms. Cheney. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
Yep.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report.
4 yeas, 6 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, vote now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
Ayes have it, ayes have it.
As for roll call.
Gentlemen, ask for roll call vote. Clerk will poll the committee.
Mr. Cole, Mr. Woodall. Yes. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins, aye. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Byrne, aye. Mr. Newhouse. Mr. Buck. Yep. Mr. Buck, aye. Ms. Cheney. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Nope. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis, no. Mrs. Torres. Mrs. Torres, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report total.
6 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Accordingly, the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Collins, will be handling this for Republicans.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, will have for the Democrats.
Judge Hastings will be handling this for Democrats. I want to thank the members of our, who've stuck around, of the audience, who've taken time to be here, Judge Hastings, for you bringing these distinguished young women to be with a part of us today. And I want to thank each of the members for their attention to detail. This finishes the work. We have no additional meetings that are scheduled this week. Yes, Judge.
While I don't have any, you've indicated we don't have.
Excuse just a moment, please.
You've indicated
for the stenographer to be able to hear, I'd like to ask that anyone in here please not be speaking over Judge Hastings. Judge?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Understanding that we don't have any further work, I have a recommendation for the future in light of the remainder of this cycle and maybe for the future. Most of us have gone to work at given times in our careers at 8 o'clock in the morning. Not tomorrow, but it would seem to me that it wouldn't be unwarranted if we would, on getaway day, come in at 8 o'clock. And the reason that I raise it, I don't know whether the rest of you are experiencing it, but there are fewer and fewer flights in the afternoon. And most of us, I hear the Georgians, I know those of us from Florida, our last flight is at 12:35, and otherwise we wind up having to stay here longer. It's just, I know that's not your province, but you can speak with Mr. McCarthy and Mr. Scalise and Speaker Ryan, and maybe they would give some consideration as we move on the rest of the schedule for this summer. And that changes, I might add. The airlines flip it back in the fall, and maybe then we could come in at 10 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock.
Judge Hastings, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I do consider that a thoughtful observation. I want to thank you for that. Okay, this finishes our work for, distinguished gentleman from Colorado, this finishes our work for the week.